Hello and welcome to History Time. On June 5th this year, we forgot to observe the golden jubilee of a great social transformation. That was the decision of the Tamil Nadu government to replace hand-drawn rickshaws with cycle rickshaws. That happened in the year 1973. Let us look at the history behind this mode of public transport. In our Hindu Puranas, gods have mounts, various animals, the lion, the tiger, the peacock, the bandicoot. You have so many others. But there is only one deity who travels on man, and that is Kubera, the god of wealth. No one else is given that status. It is a parody on mankind that they are so overcome with greed that they carry Kubera on their shoulders. And certainly the ancients must have looked down upon this practice of one person carrying the other. But eventually it would come to India. The first time, as per Wikipedia, that the rickshaw was used was in 1879 in Japan. The term for it there is Jin rickshaw. Jin stands for human, Rik stands for powered, Shaw stands for vehicle. So it is very clearly a vehicle that is drawn by human beings. In India, it made its appearance in Simla in the 1880s. Simla was then the summer capital of India. For 6 months, the imperial government would move from Calcutta to Simla and operate from there. And by the 1890s, early 1900s, there was a rule in that imperial summer capital that only 3 motor cars were allowed on Mall Road and the other principal thoroughfares of the city. Those 3 belonged to the Viceroy, the Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army, and the Governor of the Punjab. All other people had to go on horse carriages or on horseback or by foot. It was very difficult to do that in a town of elevations. And that is when the rickshaw made its appearance in Simla. Gradually, it became adapted for use in most of the metropolitan cities of India. And Madras was no different. From 1911 or so, we have records of rickshaws being used in the city. Why did men come to pull men? You must remember that that was a time of appalling poverty. Famines were very common in the countryside. And when people lost their livelihood, they moved to the city in search of some employment. Many of them became rickshaw pullers. Even then, there was a social disparity. The rickshaws were owned by others, and they then loaned it to the rickshaw pullers who paid a rent and then earned a living on it. The Corporation of Madras insisted on 2 licenses for every rickshaw. One was for the ownership of the rickshaw, and the other was the permit to ply the rickshaw. And the rickshaw puller had to carry both the papers with him when he went around. You can imagine most of them went around bare-bodied, and it is a very hot city. They would have sweated. And these licenses were made of paper. Many of them would get tattered and they would just self-destruct over time. And the policeman could haul any rickshaw man at will and ask him for his papers. If he did not have it with him, he was immediately taken to the police station and harassed no end. The plight of the hand-pulled rickshaw puller was really pitiable. In 1951, the matinee idol M.G. Ramachandran noticed that during the heavy monsoons that year, rickshaw pullers went around drenched to the skin. And that is when he came forward and purchased 6,000 raincoats at a cost of 10 rupees each and distributed them for free among the rickshaw pullers, becoming an idol of sorts among that community. Writers debated on whether a hand-pulled rickshaw was really acceptable. C.W. Ranson, who came to Madras in the 1930s, wrote a book, A City in Transition. And in that, he says that when you want to get onto a rickshaw, you have to stifle your conscience to do so. At the same time, he says you cannot deny the right of employment to the rickshaw puller because that is what his livelihood depends on. Similarly, Kottamangalam Subbu, wrote a short story, Vaidigar Patna Pravesam, in Tamil, and that is part of this compilation of Pazha Adhiyaman titled Chennai Ki Vandhen. It looks at the experiences of several prominent authors about their first time they came to this city. And Subbu chose to write about a Brahmin, Vembanna, who comes to Madras for the first time, and Subbu himself goes to receive him at the station. Vembanna is shocked to know that there is something called a cycle rickshaw, a hand-pulled rickshaw. He asks Subbu whether a horse or a bullock will be dragging it. And when he is told that it is a man who is going to be pulling it, Vembanna remarks that, like the monkey in the Panchatantra story, when you come to the city, you have to leave your heart in the village. That, in effect, sums up what you had to do if you had to get on to the hand-pulled rickshaw. At the same time, it was a necessity. You had the jatka, you had the tram, you even had the bus for going long distances. But if you needed to go short distances, you had to depend on this mode of transport. In the late 1950s, the Kamaraj government debated on the evil practice of the hand-pulled rickshaw and came to a conclusion. It announced that the government would give interest-free loans to those who wanted to replace the hand-pulled rickshaw with a cycle rickshaw. But very few came forward. The reason for that, the ownership was with people who did not pull the rickshaw. Finally, it was left to the DMK government in 1969-70 to come up with a revolutionary step. By the time C.N. Annadurai was dead and M. Karunanidhi had taken over as Chief Minister. In 1969-70, he announced that the government would very soon come up with a scheme to replace all hand-pulled rickshaws with cycle rickshaws. This was around the time that the matinee ideal M.G. Ramachandran acted in a movie titled Rikshakaran. It became a huge success, and he was still with the DMK at that time. The party, the rickshaw, MGR all became identified with each other. Karunanidhi went ahead and announced that the funds, around 20 lakhs required for replacing around 2,000 rickshaws in the whole of Tamil Nadu, would come from the party cadre. And the party cadre went about collecting the money. There were complaints of coercion, there were complaints about tax officials exacting the money from people who had to pay, etc., etc. But it cannot be denied that by 1973, the required amount of 20 lakhs had been collected. On June 3rd, 1973, Karunanidhi's 50th birthday, the government announced that henceforth the hand-pulled rickshaw would be banned. On 5th June, at Rajaji Hall, there was a ceremony, and on that day, the Chief Minister handed over 301 cycle rickshaws to those who had been pulling rickshaws till then. The government also announced a new scheme. Those who had been pulling rickshaws without owning them would get cycle rickshaws for free. And the owners of hand-pulled rickshaws, if they wanted to surrender them, could do so and would get 200 rupees in compensation. At a time when the depreciated value of a hand-pulled rickshaw was only 20 rupees, this was an enormous incentive, and people came forward. The government announced that those who wished to exchange their rickshaws could do so at the closest police station. And by September 15th that year, all 2,000 hand-pulled rickshaws had been replaced by cycle rickshaws. The cycle rickshaw community identified itself completely with M.G. Ramachandran. And till very long, till fairly recently, when you went to places like Georgetown and Mylapore, you could see cycle rickshaw pullers having a photograph of MGR pasted on their rickshaws. They considered him to be the reason behind the transformation, no matter that Karunanidhi was the man who brought it into implementation. We are going to show you a set of photographs of Shankar, a cycle rickshaw puller from Mylapore, who even now keeps a photograph of MGR on his vehicle. But change is the only constant. Even as these rickshaws were being replaced by cycle rickshaws, there were already 200 auto rickshaws in the city. And gradually, they would come to replace the cycle rickshaw itself. Today, you can hardly see a cycle rickshaw anywhere. But there are more than 1 lakh auto rickshaws in this city of Madras, that is Chennai. That is transformation for you. the only change. The mode of transport keeps changing all the time. See you soon in yet another episode. Bye for now.